Shalom. Today's message is entitled Biblical Utopia, and I'm going to talk about how the attempts of governments to make heaven on earth fail to reference the biblical goal of life on earth. So I'm presently reading Bill Barr's new book. My interest in it is because he was the Attorney General for the United States when I was entering adulthood and leaving high school. And again, in the last, very recently, the last years of the Trump administration. So I'm really interested to hear his contrast between the two positions and the history. And it's turning out to be an incredibly eye-opening book for history. A very wonderful read because he's bringing to light details and backstories of large events, both in the last couple of years and also 30 years ago, that I didn't know, even though I lived during those times. But buried in the middle of his book, there's a section that's called the Trump years, and I got to it. And I'm like, okay, here we go. We're going to start talking about the Trump years. There's a very incredible section, very intellectual section on the difference between the left's idea of a society and the conservative idea of society. He contrasts the difference between left and right in the United States in a way that I've never seen done before, and it's so intellectual and it's very intriguing. And on the left is the desire to create a perfect society by using government to remove risk, provide for almost all basic services, and generally educate/indoctrinate society toward whatever fancies the elites. And that's why we see for the past 30 or 40 years, we see these dramatic changes in our society, the dramatic kind of attempt to change the definitions of right and wrong on all sorts of issues is because of that perspective. On the right is this idea of limited tiered governance with decisions made at the lowest level possible by elected representatives who reflect the population of their localities. So the former position, the left's position, is one that has been tried and failed miserably time after time. I don't know why people keep trying this. The Soviet Union tried it. Nazi Germany tried it. China's tried it, and they had to back off and have a kind of a strange society that they have now. Venezuela is a country that adopted this way of governance, this philosophy in recent memory, and has turned into a giant ash heap of a country when it used to be one of the best countries on earth. So the position on the right, though, it is very different. And it's one that will work for a while, but it has to be reset every 50 years ago. And that's a very interesting number of years, because as we get into the biblical stuff today, that's going to come up a lot. But it's important to note that we have a mix of these two systems in the country today. The predominant version is the leftist one, but the right version of general anarchy. So on two sides of the spectrum, you have the socialist left communist view where nobody owns any private property and the government controls everything. And then on the extreme right, you have anarchy, and you have this pure free market idea to where everybody just basically fends for themselves. And so our country has a mix of these two philosophies in it today. Most of the West does. And what both of these systems of government try to offer someone to the citizens is that even though they're diametrically opposed concepts, the adherents to these beliefs, particularly those on the extremes, believe that their method of government is going to create a version of utopia on earth. The utopia, and that's a word that the left uses. So the left view is getting more color today than the right, but the left view is that a society, they want to create a society where everyone is equal, with equal income and equal status and equal lifestyle. That's their stated goal. However, every single time this is tried, there is always this insulated group at the top who are defining equality and defining all of these terms apart from it. So they make a lot of decisions that do not apply to them. They're a ruling class, or also known as an elite, and and they get to live like wealthy capitalists while everybody else gets to live in equality of squalor. So that's one version of utopia. The right's version of utopia is kind of a magical free market system where hard work and innovation lead to financial success, employment is generally fair, and people are left alone as much as possible. But it's but without any type of intervention, it's just pure free market on the extreme, to where the society dictates, or the desires of the supply side economics basically dictates everything. And it's more appealing by a lot than the leftist one, but neither one of these are really what the Bible's concept of life on earth, the utopian life on earth. Meaning, I'm not talking about life in the millennium or life in the Olam Haba. I'm talking about how does the Bible expect mankind to live in this day and age? So what did Yahweh determine as his utopian society within the construct and constraints of this fallen world? So let's start looking at it. And the first place to look is in the Apocrypha. It's called First Maccabees. This is not in a 66 book Bible because it's not scripture. But unfortunately, this is the only place that I've seen the biblical utopia actually recorded as being experienced. So let's take a look here. In First Maccabees 14, 8 through 15, this is the Brenton translation of the Septuagint's Apocrypha. Lord Brenton was a scholar in the 1800s, I think, who translated this into British English. So it reads a little different than King James English and whatnot, or modern English. So, then did they till their ground in peace, and the earth gave her increase, and the trees of the field their fruit. The ancient men sat in all the streets, communing together of good things. The young men put on glorious and warlike apparel. He provided victuals for the cities, and set them in all manner of munition, so that his honorable name was renowned into the end of the world. He made peace in the land, and Israel rejoiced with great joy. For every man sat under his vine and his fig tree, and there was none to fray them. Neither was there any left in the land who fight against them. Yea, the kings themselves were overthrown in those days. Moreover, he strengthened all those of his people that were brought low. The law he searched out, and every contemner of the law and wicked person he took away. He beautified the sanctuary and multiplied the vessels of the temple. So let's start unpacking this, because this is just a small paragraph of a time in Israel's life, the life of Israel, the country, that things were really good. And the first thing is, this defines peace, because and we have to back up a little bit. The he in here is not Yahweh. The he that is referenced in this is a man named Jason Maccabeus, who is the leader, basically the king, or the kind of the pseudo high priest of Israel at the time, and he was the son of Judas Maccabeus. And Israel had been overrun by Greeks. A lot of the Jews had actually converted to Greekism, if that's a thing, and these guys couldn't stand it. They started a revolution, and this is like 30 years after they started the revolution, where it's actually worked, where they were able to push the Greeks out of Judea long enough to achieve peace. And this king that they're talking about here is Jason Maccabeus. That's the he in here. And he's getting credit for what Yahweh did. He's getting credit for actually making peace in the land. And that peace is defined very specifically here as that the ancient men sat in the streets, meaning the elders would just sit in the streets and relax and talk and shoot the breeze every day. Um, the earth gave her increase, and the trees of the field produced their food, and they got to eat them. So when a man plants and he gets to eat his own food, that means that there's peace. That means he doesn't have to go off to war. Somebody else doesn't have to plant so that he can eat. And then the kids, the young men, are pretending to war, which is good because they're not literally training for war. And they strengthened the people that brought low. They restored the Torah. Everybody who did not follow the Torah was put out, the wicked person to put away, and they beautified the sanctuary and multiplied the vessels of the temple. That is very flowery language to say they restored the temple and everybody was using it again. It doesn't just mean that they tidied up the place. It means that they started to use it again, so they were free to follow the Torah. This is a vision of Israel where they get to eat their increase and there's nobody warring with them, nobody's fighting with them. They're at peace and they're following the Torah. So where do all these things come from? Because this author of Maccabees here has defined peace, and he's a reporter. It seems that this book, First Maccabees, was written by an eyewitness of these events, somebody who lived during the time and wanted to record the history. So let's take a look at Scripture to see how to build the society that they defined as their utopia. So Leviticus 25:15 through 16 says, corresponding to the number of years after the Jubilee you shall buy from your friend. He is to sell to you according to the number of years of crops. In proportion to the extent of the years you shall increase its price, and in proportion to the fewness of the years you shall diminish its price, for it is a number of crops he is selling to you. So the problem, a big, huge problem that we have in the West today is the valuation of real estate, of land. And this is a very intriguing way of tying the price of land to wages. And it takes a couple of steps to get there. But if somebody were to go buy a field that can produce 40 bushels of corn a year, and that the bushel of corn went for however much money, and that could feed however many people, then that means that the people who had to consume the corn have to be able to afford it. So the price of the bushel is determined by the market and the society's ability to buy food. And so then the land is actually valued as to how many years after the Jubilee or until the Jubilee, and then multiplied by the bushels that it can make by how much money that cost. So that way somebody couldn't take a 40 bushel parcel of land and charge you 27 years worth of the effect of 27 years worth of harvest when the Jubilee was going to be in 2 years. And so the value of land was always going down based on the days in the days from the Jubilee. This is a pretty intriguing stuff. But today, if you live here in Kansas City, you can get pretty far outside the city and find affordable house. But if you're in the city now, houses are getting up to $300,000, $400,000 a year. That is out of reach for most working class people. Are not going to be able to afford that, so they're going to have to either move far away or they're going to have to rent, and they're not, and the land is based on arbitrary values today. A few years ago, actually it was quite a few years ago, we had a bunch of work done on our house and we had it reappraised, thinking that the work we did was going to make it worth more and we had to increase our insurance. But when they came and checked our house out, the value of our house was determined by the last 3 pieces of property that were similar to ours that sold recently. It had nothing to do with the land. I mean, the square footage of the house and the stuff that it had. Well, they just took and compared that to like houses, and they came up with a value. So there was no real reason as to why the house cost what it cost. It was just kind of market based, and this is why we see these wide swings in the price of real estate, to the point that on both coasts of the United States, there are huge communities, many millions of people who will never get to own homes because they simply cannot. You can't make enough money as a family of four to afford a $700,000 house of 1,600 square feet. There's just not a possibility. They're never going to appreciate the home ownership. So the purpose of this slide is to explain that the Torah based agricultural land on an actual valuation that tied it to wages of people who ate, whereas the contrast is in our lifetimes today, real estate is generally an arbitrary uh, pricing just based on how much somebody was able to get out of the last house in the neighborhood. Okay. So next slide is Deuteronomy 15:6-11. For Yahweh your Elohim will bless you as he has promised you, and you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow, and you will rule over many nations, and they will not rule over you. If there is a poor man with you, one of your brothers, in any of your towns in your land, which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor close your hand from the poor brother, but you shall freely open your hand to him, and shall generously lend to him sufficient for his need and whatever he lacks. Beware that there is no base thought in your heart, saying, the seventh year, the year of remission, is near, and your eye is hostile toward your poor brother, and you give him nothing. Then he may cry to Yahweh against you, and it will be a sin to you. You shall generously give to him, and your heart shall not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in all your work, in all your undertakings, for the poor will never cease to be in the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother, to your needy poor in the land. Okay, so the first part of this is that lending is control. Moses is writing Yahweh's words here, and it's saying that you're going to lend to nations, you're not going to borrow, you're going to rule over them, they will not rule over you. It's equating lending and having other nations be in debt to you as you ruling them. And that works and then it starts talking about people as well. And don't we know that if you're in debt, you are ruled? You are ruled by an invisible master, because until you are debt free, you must have a job. You must do certain things if you are in debt. And it is impossible in our society for working class people or even upper middle class people to purchase a house without having a substantial loan, which means that you're immediately in debt. If you want to have a late model vehicle, especially these days, they're so expensive that you have to have a loan. And our society is the opposite of the Bible society, because our society is debt-based. If all the debt in the United States went away, how many millions of people would lose their jobs in accounting and in all these finance jobs and stuff like that? If there was a true jubilee in the United States and everybody just who was in a house just all of a sudden automatically owned their house and had no debt against it, and all the car debt was erased and all the credit card debt was erased and everything went away and everybody went even, it would be very good for most of the population, but it would be very bad for the financial houses, and it would be an incredibly disrupting event. And we know this is happening because when Babylon falls at the end of days, the financial system of the end of days is going to disintegrate. And so at some point, this is all going to fall apart. But until then, we have to know what Bible says about how we're supposed to live, and we're not supposed to be in debt. I don't know very many people who are in debt, but we're all striving to get out of it, and we are teaching our kids not to get into it. The other thing here is that the poor will never cease. There's always going to be poor people, and that's in Torah. It's always there. Yeshua didn't make that up when he said you will always have the poor. Torah was built to deal with people being impoverished. Now, whether Yahweh designed it that way or whether it's just a natural occurrence that he knew was going to happen, there's always going to be wealthy people and there's always going to be poor people. So you have to be generous to the poor even when it's going to hurt. But keep in mind that if the Torah was made with an inclination to with provisions for poor people, that means governments can't make the poor go away. And in the right versus left thing, the left thinks that they can end poverty, and you cannot. The only way you end poverty is to be generous to people and be charitable. And the right thinks that just to deal with the charitable side of it and some magical thing will happen for the poor people. Now, it used to be in the United States before we got the alphabet soup um, agencies from the federal agencies to take care of all of our poverty and all of our needs. It used to be that churches were the places that poor people went in order to get helped, and it was better because you would have to go and explain your circumstances, and the church would take you in and help you, and then put you on the road to solving the problem that put you in that predicament and put you on a better path. Today, with the way the poor has to get help from federal government and state government today, they have to basically go humiliate themselves, lose all their dignity, bear all their souls and all their sins to the federal government in order to apply for some financial aid that they might get at some point in time, and their government is completely involved in their lives. It's not the way that the Torah was written, and it is not a dignified way of helping people. And for the past 60 years, this war on poverty has failed. We continue to have impoverished people, and now we've got people who in the country who have third, fourth generation Medicare people who or Medicaid people, or people on all these welfare programs who are raised on welfare programs, whose kids are raised on welfare programs, and it's just spiraling completely out of control. So in this case, it would be much better. In all cases, it's always better to go back to the Bible. But if we could apply the biblical principles here and return this charity back to the churches where it belongs, it would help out a lot. Next slide. You are to count off 7 Sabbaths, is Leviticus 25, 8 to 13. You are also to count off 7 Sabbath of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years, namely 49 years. You shall then sound a ram's horn abroad on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement, and you shall sound a horn all through your land. Thus you shall thus consecrate the 50th year and proclaim a release through the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his own property, and each of you shall return to his family. You shall have the 50th year as a jubilee. You shall not sow nor reap its aftergrowth, no gather in from its untrimmed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its crops out of the field. On this year of jubilee, each of you shall return to his own property. So this is where that 50-year thing I was talking about in the beginning comes back in. Either Yahweh designed us to need a reset every 50 years, or this is just a natural truth of mankind's society, and he knew it was going to happen. But we need a reset every 50 years. You remember I was talking about how the right likes to have the free market and local control. Well, what happens if you have local control for too long? The same people keep getting elected, and they keep getting more and more power, and then before long they're the elites, and there's nothing you can do to affect the change at the local level. And the same thing holds true with the financial houses. Without having a planned reset, then the wealthy are always the wealthy, the poor are always the poor, and there is no release. There's no relief for anything. So this reset, this sabbatical year, 7-year cycle, and then the 50-year cycle is wonderful because it's a planned reset. It plans, and as far as the localities and the politics go, Chris, where does it say that in there? Well, if you look at how the people have to return to their lands. The other anomaly today in our society is that the family has been split up and spread out all over the country as people have moved for opportunity or hurricanes or whatever. The families, I grew up in a town where my parents had 6 children, and I do not believe none of my siblings live in our original hometown. We're all over the country. And people are dying these days, and the family showing up at the funeral, they don't even know the family member that died. The next of kin doesn't know how to bury them. It's very strange. But if you put that in the political realm, if people are have gathered up a bunch of power based on an electoral situation, if that had to be broken every 50 years and people had to go back to their ancestral homes, it shuffles the deck and gives everybody a 50-year reset, and it removes that crony ability of people to just have this good old boy network. Um, in this case, everybody gets their debts forgiven. In this case, everybody gets their debts forgiven, and the tribes go back to their ancestral homes and ancestral lands. This is a wonderful thing because it's a full-blown reset. It understands that the business cycle is going to happen. Economists have spent lots of money on and time studying business cycles, and they realize that every once in a while there's a reset. This is why we watch the stock market so closely, because it gets so high valued, it gets out of sync, and then there's usually a very violent correction where the stock market has to go and pull back for a couple of quarters to get it back in alignment with reality. Well, in this case of the Bible, there's 50 years, and the 49th year, on the Day of Atonement in the 49th year, they sound the shofar to tell everybody that you got 6 months to get ready. Everybody's going home, and we're going to have the big fat reset. So everybody gets their debts forgiven, but not everybody gives up their wealth. They go back to their lands and they go back home. But if you're wealthy and you have money, you keep the money and you take it home. So in this case, there are people who are going to be very good entrepreneurs, and they're going to make money. These people exist even today. There's these captains of industry that no matter what situation you put them in, they're going to make money, and they're going to make it abundantly, and they're going to use it for good or bad or whatever. So the Torah doesn't take away people's wealth. It does take away their land and return it. And what it also does, and it reunites the families. And during the reset, nobody works, and Yahweh provides the food by leaving all the food just growing wild. The people get to walk and get it. This eliminates strife and puts everybody on a level playing field. And what it does is every 50 years, it actually does force everybody to be equal, which is like what? Like the 39 years of the Exodus. In the 39 years of the Exodus, people could have money. They have all the money they wanted. They could have wealth. Remember, they got paid to leave Egypt, and they had a bunch of money, a bunch of gold and whatever. You couldn't buy anything with it. And they all had to eat manna. 39 years, they were all very much equal. So what this does is on a 50-year cycle, it makes everybody be equal. And the economic cycles are gone because everybody knows when it's coming, and you can prepare and you can know. And if your family has fallen into bad finances and whatever, you have an opportunity at restoration. And keep in mind that this model is probably what we're going to be doing in the millennium, the 1,000 years, but this is not a model for eternity. We don't really know what the government is going to be in the Olam Haba, which is called the world to come, or the time after the 1,000 years, eternity. Mainstream Christianity calls it heaven, but they think it's now. But when we finally get to that point, it's not this agrarian society. This Torah is probably not going to be how we live. We're probably not going to be raising cattle and feeding ourselves for eternity because we won't need food, but we can only speculate on that. So next is Leviticus 19, 9 through 18. Now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest, nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. I am Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, so as to profane the name of your Elohim. I am Yahweh. You shall not oppress your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning. You shall not curse a deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind. But you shall revere your Elohim, I am Yahweh. You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great. But you are to judge your neighbor fairly. You shall not go about as a slanderer among your people, and you are not to act against the life of your neighbor. I am Yahweh. You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but you shall not incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh. So, Yeshua said the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And most of Christianity defines that in modern terms. They define it however love is defined as, is nice and touchy and feely. But he was quoting this. He was quoting this, and this tells you exactly how to love your neighbor, and that's through behavior, and it's through works, it's through actions and interactions, and not ripping people off. So just a reminder that the more we study Torah, the more we're going to understand the New Testament, the more we're going to understand the Messiah. Leaving food around for travelers and the needy. This is such dignity. It assumes the land is at complete peace so that sojourners can walk around without any food. They don't have to keep supplies on them unless they get robbed. And it's very hospitable because you're expecting people to come trespass on your land and grab a fig or grab an apple or a pomegranate, or in the case of the apostles in the New Testament, grab some wheat ears and eat them. See, the Pharisees were trying to cause hay with Yeshua when they were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. They were sojourning. They're more than allowed. They're expected to just grab food and eat it as they walk around. And it also fails to realize that the person whose land they were standing on followed these rules. They were Torah followers. So it's very good what was happening there, and the Pharisees were just totally wrong. And leaving food around for the needy, for the poor, it shows a lot of dignity because they can go and grab what they need. They have to do work to get it, take it home, prepare it, and the like. And they could do it in the dark of night if they wanted to, so that way people didn't have to know they were needy. Unlike today, where you have to go and apply for assistance from the government to get anything, they could just go get what they needed around harvest time and store it up. And it was expected. And the people who let them have it, who let them have the food, would be blessed. So no false dealings. Wouldn't that be great? Today we have to sign up for these terms and conditions and all these contracts where it takes 5 lawyers to define one paragraph of a contract. It's really a strange world that we live in today because there's false dealings everywhere. Everybody's expected to be false dealings with each other. It's an absolute shame. No swearing falsely by his name. This is why we put our hands on the Bibles when we take an oath or we swear into an office or join the military. Wouldn't it be great if everybody said, I swear that everything they said after that was actually the truth? It'd be wonderful. Wouldn't you want to live there? And the next part is the no mocking or mocking the disabled or hindering them. This is basically the Israelis with Disabilities Act right here. And it's interesting because that part of our society comes from the left. The left are the people that made the rules about having handicapped access, having rails in bathrooms, and making things with Braille on your ATM machine. We need to be conscientious of the people who are less fortunate than us. And this is telling us that right here before our very eyes, that we cannot mock people with disabilities and we can't hinder them. We need to help them. They're needy, and we need to make society as accommodating for them, whereas the pure free market side of things would say, well, if the blind people wanted to get in here, they'd find a way. I mean, you have to have some accommodation for people, and I think it's good that our society has that. The next part is that justice is blind. Rich and poor are to have the same standard. we really want that. I mean, that's not a thing in this nation today, where wealthy people get away with literally murder. And um, the young man who was on TV who tried to basically start race riots across the country only did 6 days in jail, while there's a Navy veteran who took a picture of the nuclear reactor who may never get out of jail for the rest of his life. I mean, there's no parity. There is no equality to the justice today. But the Torah, in Yahweh's biblical utopia, justice doesn't favor either side. And no hating your countrymen. We're way past that. You guys remember all of those riots we had a couple years ago where people were just burning statues and tearing down monuments and destroying private property right and left. I mean, it was a complete hate-filled mob on display on our televisions every single night. And it says no bearing grudges. Now that's a hard one. Got to admit that. And no taking vengeance. Well, obviously we can't be taking vengeance on people. But all this boils down to loving our neighbor. It's defined. It's not new. So we can know how to love our neighbor. And don't we wish life was actually like that? So today's topics show how Israel was meant to be a society and a culture, and it was the best that we could do this side of the kingdom. The Torah is not just a set of do's and don'ts, but a lifestyle. And I only know of a record of them keeping this lifestyle in the Maccabees. I mean, for any extended period of time, I'm sure the Joshua generation did keep the Torah for a while. But the second peace came, those guys turned to the Ashtaroth, they turned to the Baals, they turned to the Moabites. The second peace came, those guys got really slack. The assumption is that life will be like this during the 1,000 years or something similar, but the Olam Haba, again, we really don't know. But for today, we do have a model how we should strive to live, even though we are outside the land. We have to find a way to navigate the societies we live in while longing to live in a biblical lifestyle. And the book of Deuteronomy tells us what will happen when we leave the land, when you exit the land, is because of disobedience, and that you will long to be back in the land and long to be back with Torah. And that's why we have these things written on our hearts, because we want to live properly. We who have been called out of Babylon, have the Holy Spirit, we follow the Torah because the Torah is justice. We want to live in that environment. Now, the first century Christians, they didn't return to this. They went and spread the gospel to where people were, because it's a slightly different mission, because now we're preparing people for the coming kingdom of God. And we can navigate today's societies understanding that even in the Torah's biblical lifestyle, there are poor, there's needy, there's need for justice, there's income inequality, families are separated. All sorts of bad things exist in this society that have to be dealt with, and Yahweh has given us clues on how to do that. We live in a fallen world, and Torah was given as the best means to manage that fallen world. And we have the Torah on our hearts because we long for its justice, realizing that the economic and legal realities of today are not aligned with the Bible. I want to thank you all for listening. May Yahweh bless you and keep you in the name of his son Yeshua. Please drop by firstcenturychristianity.net. Give this thing a like and a share, and subscribe to get some more. Thank you so much. Have a blessed week. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.